Anyone wants to ask anything or share? Yeah, okay. Nuska?
So I had a question, Mike. I don't know if you remember our last conversation, but I started going to the ordinance house because I felt like I was given a role there, much like an apprenticeship under a chancellor over there, and which is very different from the mandates. And I did get to catch from the last time I spoke to you, I did get to watch part of the videos that you set up for Chancellor House, but I didn't get to complete them, but I will. And so what I noticed was that, I mean, apart from after getting the scepter that looked like more of light but rainbow colors, it was this multicolored scepter, very different from all the other ones that I've ever had. And after we spoke, I received a medallion. I was wondering if you have any idea for the purpose of a medallion, because I never used it as a lord or as a king. So
Yeah, I mean, a medallion, I would call it a seal, like a sort of thing that puts placed around your neck with emblems on it. I was given one of those, as a chancellor seal, which opened up all sorts of other places to be able to engage in the realms of heaven. That was almost sort of like a reference point to give me access into different places, and I used it a number of times to access things in that realm. I think the best thing on all these things, is go back to God and ask Him what it's all about. Because for you it might be different. For me, I have a seal, which is like a medallion that goes round. But whatever you've received may be for a specific purpose, or it may well be for a general purpose. You have to find out, really. I mean, I tend, in governmental issues, if I don't talk to God about it, then I'll ask wisdom. And because He's there to help us in the roles of ruling and the functions of government in the realms of heaven. So from that perspective, wisdom's helped me a lot in understanding. She's the one who actually gave me my seal quite a few years ago. And I found that it opened up, or I was recognized in different places, and therefore had access to different places as a result of that seal. It's not that I particularly use it for anything, but it gives me recognition and therefore access when I'm in possession of it, if you like. So, yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because with my journey, my journey has been a bit strange. like everyone's got an individual journey. Yeah. And my journey went from being a lord, a king, and a chancellor in about 1.5 years. But when I became a chancellor, I was given a staff, and that staff gave me access into Satan's trophy room in different places. And I still didn't know at that time that I had become a chancellor because I didn't expect things to go so fast. I think maybe with forerunners, it takes time because they're making the way for us. You know what I mean? But I remember when I met Lindy Strong, she came down and I hung out with her. And one of the first things that she said to me when she seen me was, she said, "I see propellers behind you." And she said, "Wherever you position yourself, you're going to just be thrust forward." And that was my journey, which is so strange. Right from the time I started. I don't even know how you get that, this type of acceleration or how it's there. I don't know. But yeah, I got that. I've been a chancellor for a year now. And I didn't feel like going to the chancellor houses. I never did. I just focused on what I had to do. But then Father started showing me the commissioning room, and he started taking me to these places. And then I started realizing that they were the chancellor houses, and he was preparing me to start stepping in. And then the whole year last year, I started going through all of the chancellor houses and understanding what each house was. as limited as my understanding was. But going in there really helped. Now and then I started understanding what the places were. And then I was given a role in this ordinance house under the chancellor over there, much like an apprenticeship. And, like a role which is different from a mandate as such.
Yeah, sure.
And I was like, okay. And I was given the scepter. I'm not sure why I was given the scepter, because I was already a chancellor, but I got a scepter over there, strangely. And then immediately after I spoke with you, so about a month, and that's when I got a medallion. And then I was wondering, because was already a chancellor. And when I was listening to your videos, you said something very interesting. You said, I just watched half of it, and you said that you received these devices, or these seven things that you got, and I got the same, but I didn't get from Prudence, and I got them differently. I got them in the Discovery House. I'd seen them lying there on the table, and they were seven. So they were a bit different from the ones that you got, with the exception of one or two. But
Sure.
yeah,
But
experience
but
was
they're
different.
going to be different because they're
But
designed for
similar.
you. And I think in all these things, there's a personal role. A scepter is just a symbol of authority. You can have a scepter for different areas of rule. So giving a scepter within the Ordnance House is just a position which recognizes your authority to rule there. So the scepter is the outworking of the government. They're just symbolic things that indicate authority. The key is using the authority. What are you doing with it? How do you do that? And most of that for me comes out of engaging in intimacy with the Father's heart and knowing his heart and only doing what I see him doing from that perspective. Then the desires of my heart will be aligned to his. And then any government and any positions of authority where we're in those positions is an outworking of his heart in sonship. Without the heart, then the authority is limited. Even though we're in lots of positions, I mean, I was in lots of positions back in 2010, but I didn't know how to use them, and I had very little authority because I was just shown the position. It took a long time to learn what to do there and how to do it. So a position has to have authority with it, and that comes with identity. So it takes time. I've got things that I was shown in 2010 that I'm still not fully functioning in, but it's okay. It's a journey, and it takes as long as it takes to mature to the place where not only are we knowing the authority we have, but we have the actual wisdom and insight of the heart of God to be able to use it. And I think that's the key. Being able to use it is the key. If you don't function in it, then the position is pretty much useless. So it's an ongoing process of learning bit by bit to come into our identity in sonship, find the positions that's outworked in, and then learn to use that authority wisely, only in accordance to the Father's will, but creatively, because we're made creatively to outwork the Father's will. So we don't have to all do it the same way. But if we don't know his heart, then all the positions in the world or heaven won't make a bit of difference because we don't have the authority. The authority comes when we carry the Father's heart and it motivates our heart. Like it talks about writing on the tablets of our heart. And that's a description really of being entrained to a higher frequency. His heart is a higher frequency that entrains us into an alignment with his heart, and then heaven recognizes that we rule out of his heart. If it doesn't recognize that we're ruling out of his heart, then it doesn't respond to us, no matter what position we're seated in. It only responds when it recognizes the heart of the Father and the voice of God that we speak with effectively. So, yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else like to talk about anything, share anything, or ask? Yeah, Emma.
First of all, thank you so much for all the help you gave me with my dad. Can you hear
Okay,
me?
yeah, the last time we met, yeah.
Yeah. Um, that lasted all of one day. And it's me. It's me. I know. Um, and I guess oh gosh, I don't even know where to start. I know that what we're talking about is real. Um, but I have yet to really, when I try to engage with God, with Jesus, um, it's just a struggle. And I find it's just easier to just do the work I know I need to do in this realm, and just catch, you know, try and talk to him in my thoughts every day. But and I see him, helping me in those little things, but it's the big ones that I just don't seem to be able to find that quiet place. I don't know. I feel like I'm on the bottom of the rung when it comes to meeting with a group like this that are talking about all these cool things they see, and I'm kind of stuck on planet Earth right now.
Okay, well, I think you need to remember that God's in you. So wherever you are, you're a carrier of his presence. So engaging within is the first steps to everything else. Because if you engage everything in the realms of heaven, but you're not engaging him within, then there's no flow of heaven into the earth. So it's worth taking the time to build that relationship of intimacy within. So sensing his presence and engaging in first love and practicing listening and beginning then to engage in a more conscious way. That takes time, and I think it's learning to rest, be still, and know that I'm God. That's quite difficult when often we have an agenda of what we want to know and why we want to engage him. If we remove the agenda and just for relationship's sake desire more intimacy, then everything will flow out of that. It isn't easy when you want to hear specific things about specific things, because he may not want to talk to you about that. He may want to talk to you about something else. And often we're trying to get him to talk to us about something that actually stops us hearing what he does want to talk to us about, because we're blinkered. And it's important to try and take the agenda off the relationship and just experience it, because that relationship will then increase and grow and take you where you need to go, and will open up some of the bigger things that you want to engage with. First love and intimacy within our spirit, and then within our heart. Those are the keys. And it takes as long as it takes. And everyone's different, and everyone's situations are different, and everyone's time that they have available is different. So you have to factor all that in and just relax. And there are meditative techniques which can help you get to that place of relaxing. I'm doing a few sessions at the moment on how to engage the mind and engage with the intimacy of it. And I think I did the activation exercise of is in the first module, I think, and it's worth spending some time with that. Just engaging love and joy and peace. It's a 3-part meditation exercise, which is just about getting to a place of rest, enjoying his love, living out of that joy, and living in a place of peace with ourselves and other people. That is the primary thing for everything else to flow out of. And learning to still our thoughts, and be mindful and live in the moment, and don't live out of yesterday or tomorrow, but live in what's present today, I think are key parts of that. And there are things that can help. The right music can help. Background music, we've got obviously a lot of music that's designed for helping with activations and helping to engage, because it's got intention embedded within it. There are also some things in breathing. God breathed into Adam, and he then began to breathe in and out with a rhythm which was the life of God within us. And we can learn to breathe in a way which slows down our thinking so that we can tune in easier. And when I slow down my thinking in terms of breathing, I'm thinking of breathing in the name of God, Yod, Hey, Vav, Hey. So it's like God breathed into Adam, and Adam breathed out, and then he breathed back in, and then he breathed back out. And it's getting a rhythm to breathing which slows down our whole being to a place of rest. That can be helpful. And there's a number of exercises that you can just practice, learning to come to a place of rest. And from that place of rest, things do become easier when you can get to that place where you know that you're loved, and you can rest in the love, and then life takes on a different perspective when you can see it from the lens of love. There are lots of different techniques which are helpful, and some people find different ways of engaging or learning how to meditate easier than others. One of the others really is to frame things from a picture frame of, okay, I'm going to engage in what's within that frame and focus on one thing, which is a fractal of everything else. Fractal images are beautiful mathematical equations which are outworked in pictures, and creation is built on fractal images, wheels within wheels within wheels, and different things like that. What we have to do is focus on one small element rather than trying to understand the whole huge bigger picture. So, take one element of perhaps the character of God and focus on that. Put that in your frame of reference and look at that and think about that and focus on it. It could be love or joy or peace. It could be kindness or patience or goodness, some of the fruit of the Spirit. It could just be God's grace or his mercy. And, when we try and understand everything, it can be overwhelming to the point that it's too much. So being mindful is being mindful one thing at a time. And they're all elements of the bigger picture. It's like when you see a picture that's made up of thousands of little pictures, sometimes they have those creative things where you see someone's face from a distance and it looks like a person's face. And when you get up close, you realize that it's made up of thousands of people's faces, but you can't see that from the distance. If you try and see the thousands of aspects of that face, you won't be able to contain the information. So it's better to look at one aspect. So I'd encourage you to relax and just focus on some small aspects of God rather than trying to embrace all of it. And all of the other stuff that, people are doing in the realms of heaven and all that, it must be birthed out of intimacy, and therefore find that place of rest. Then you can start to see heaven flowing through you. You don't have to be in heaven for heaven to flow through you if you have that first love gate open, because rivers of living water flow That's the river of life. That's the energy that carries life. And you can have that around you as an atmosphere. And you can be imparting that atmosphere wherever you are and whatever you're doing. It's just getting a flow. And, choosing each day to open that first love gate, behold, I stand at the door and knock. Choose to open it and invite his presence and that flow, which is flowing out of heaven, into you, so that it can eventually flow through you. Along the way, it begins to energize your soul and body and affects the whole of your being. But initially, it's just getting that first step, and just resting in that first step. And you'll find that the Father will unveil different aspects of his character and nature and essence to you the more he embraces you. And that's the place really to start. Allow him to embrace you, and it just feel and sense and allow his love heart to heart to be communicated, and go from there. Don't try and look at all the other things that are possibly out there that, okay, some people talk about, and miss the actual simplicity of that intimacy face to face. Because when you look into his face, you will see back reflected who you are, and you can become that which you behold. So it's better to focus on something small that can then begin to outwork than try and do too much all in one go. And it took me years to learn to hear God's voice clearly. Now I believe that that opens up for other people to engage it in a quicker way, but it's still a process, and it's still a relational process in which we're all different in, and therefore it takes as long as it takes, and that's okay. And God knows that it takes as long as it takes, so he is not impatient. We often get impatient because we want more, and the more will come with each step. You take a step on the journey and another step on the journey and another step on the journey, and eventually you find that you've taken a lot of steps towards experiencing a lot more than what you did when you began.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, anyone else? Yep. Okay, you got your hand up there. Is that one more?
Hello, Mike.
Hi.
Okay, I was going to ask about when the activations, like when I follow your activations, I tend to, when I close my eyes, I kind of get into what I'll call a kind of trance where I'm no longer aware of my body, but and I feel like I'm not really following the activation, because I then begin to get kind of like dreamlike images that don't necessarily relate to what is being said by you. So what usually happens is that after, when the activation is over, when your voice ends, then I just get, I regain consciousness again of my body, and then I feel like I didn't really engage with the activation as I would have wanted to. You have anything to say about this?
Well, I wouldn't bother too much. If you're entering into a state where you're beginning to engage with something that God is wanting to touch you with, then go with it. The activations are just opportunities to engage with whatever God wants to do. Don't think you have to follow a set pattern. They're just examples. If it works for you to just begin to start to engage and go with the flow of that, and then tune into the images and the things that you're beginning to see or activate. Don't try and go with what I'm doing. If God wants to take you somewhere else, just go with it, and don't feel, oh no, I didn't do. It's like, hey, if you're going into a trance-like state and are beginning to engage and see things, your spirit will probably be engaging more than your soul. But just relax and go with that flow. That's okay. You know, the whole program is designed to help people engage God. You know, that's the key. If you're engaging him, don't overanalyze it. Just continue to engage and experience that, and allow that to take you where it needs to take you. You know, I think obviously I do lots of activations because that's a way of opening a door for people to find their own experience. You know, I don't want people actually really trying to copy an experience. It's to introduce to your own experience. So, you know, I wouldn't be concerned about that. Just go with it, you know, and it's not a problem to me. If you're experiencing and engaging, that's the key. That's the reason for doing the activations. You know, I don't want to dictate the fact that you've got to stick to a format. You know, go with it. You know, that would be my encouragement.
Okay, I also want to add. So the kind of dreamlike states, I don't necessarily see things that I would say relates to whether seeing Jesus himself or seeing the realms of heaven. It's more like I just see things that I feel are maybe metaphorical, things that are kind of around us, things that I can explain, that's maybe things I can see on the earth right now, and they just look like a dream, not necessarily something like a spiritual experience. So I was just wondering, is it that I don't understand it myself. I just wanted to ask you.
Well, we're all on a journey, and sometimes that journey begins in one way and then will begin to develop into other ways. And some things we see are visionary things. They're designed to have a symbolic meaning that we can engage with. Other things that we engage with are actual realities of experiences that we're having. I always encourage people to learn to hear God's voice before everything else, because then you can always go back and say, what was that about? What were you trying to show me? What were you unveiling to me? And ask him, build a relationship and develop that in the communication. And then you'll find that perhaps those things, you'll become more cooperating with it, whatever it is that God's wanting to do. You know, it's like we can activate our imagination and focus it, or we can engage our spirit and go with that flow. But I find that most of what I do is in the realm of engaging God for conversation in my times with him, because then we're communicating. He's communicating with me. He's telling me some things. You know, the visual side of it can be a blessing, but it can also be a hindrance. When you're trying to figure out what it is you're seeing, you're not relaxed and allowing a flow to come. And, you know, you can think in your mind a conversation with God. So, you know, I don't talk to him out loud. I have a conversation with him in my mind in which he communicates to me with thoughts. So if I'm seeing something or engaging something that I'm not really understanding, I just ask him, what is this? What do I need to know? Is there anything I need to know now? Do I just need to wait and see the outworking of this experience, and eventually some of those things will outwork? You know, I've had encounters in the spirit realm with God years ago that I'm still coming into. You know, sometimes you have experiences that are forerunner experiences for your own life, and they encourage you that there's more, but that more maybe 5 years down the line. That's okay. You know, I learned to relax, and I learned to not strive or push for. And because I have a conversational relationship with God, I just go back to him and talk to him about it. You know, so that to me was the key for everything else, was being able to know what he was saying and communicate with him when I didn't know what I was seeing. You know, and that often people have great visual things, but I don't know what they're seeing. And the importance is that we do have some connection to it. Now, I do believe our spirit can engage, receive more than our soul is capable of at any point in time. And eventually that revelation will get released when we're able to bear it. You know, Jesus said to the disciples, you know, I've got so many things I'd like to talk to you about, but you're not able to bear them right now. And that's okay. You know, and each of us may not be able to bear everything that there is to know, but we just continue the journey with that which we know and enter into a deeper revelation of that. So, you know, practice listening would be my encouragement for everyone at the beginning of the journey, because that later on will have a huge benefits when you do begin to engage things that are perhaps somewhat overwhelming or beyond what you can imagine or think. You know, that for me would be the key. You know, just go with the flow, but make sure that you can talk to him. And if you've not really learned to listen to him, then stop trying to activate seeing and go back to practicing listening, you know, because all the seeing will be made sense of when you can talk to God about it and he can talk to you about it, rather than just seeing things. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Mike.
Okay. Okay, anyone else got a question? Come on, don't be shy.
Hi, Mike.
Hi, Mary.
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I just want to ask this question regarding wisdom and the cloud of witnesses. You know, I had someone asking me a question saying that, she experienced wisdom and some kind of angel that came to her physically in the room. And when they came, and they are like the image of somebody that she knew before, that person's name, you know, is Angel or something like that. That person is in real life a pastor somewhere. So, and she was asking me, and I couldn't answer that question because I said, I do know that sometimes God uses, you know, people, you know, as a symbol in the dream, you know, because it was a dream or whatever. But she said that she physically, the person physically manifested in the room because she was going through some hard time. So I couldn't answer that question because I don't know that a being can come in the room in the form of somebody who is still here and speaking, because I thought that we should test our spirits. So I couldn't answer, so I don't know. So I just want to ask you, you know, because I don't know.
Obviously, you can, any visionary thing can be symbolic. So could, you know, was it literally the spirit of the person who was appearing in your room or that person's room? I doubt it, unless that person was traveling in the spirit or whatever, you know. But if God was going to speak through them, you know, and it was a symbolic thing, it can still appear to be real. You know, some visionary encounters are very real, but the symbol of it is, you know, why that person? You know, why was the picture that person? I mean, an angel can manifest in many different guises. The cloud of witnesses can engage, but they wouldn't occupy someone's body and speak through them. That's not how it works. But God could appear, or an angel could appear like somebody for the reason of in communicating something that person had a significant part to play in it, who they are, why that. And again, encourage you to go back to God and ask God, if that person is not a believer, and also it's like, what was that person saying? That's the key. What were they communicating? Did she feel at peace about that? Was she agitated by it? Did it produce any fear? That's really where you test where some of these things are coming from, in how they cause you to react and how they cause you to feel in the encounter.
She didn't feel any fear, and actually coming to give her peace, but she felt this person is wisdom. And physically manifested, and in form of somebody else's, body. So that's why I don't get it, So and the angel also coming, and bring, in the body of that person, physically in the room. So this is what the person said. So
I mean, physically, are you talking physically, or are you talking a something that you were seeing? Did you go and touch it? Because that's a physical manifestation, when you can touch and feel, and that can be touched. You can have a vision of something in the room that manifests, but it's not a physical manifestation necessarily.
I'm talking.
I mean, some of it, without knowing the full details of it, God can do anything, so I wouldn't rule anything, but certainly God is not going to occupy a person's body. There's somebody somewhere else in that way, I don't believe. But he certainly can appear in many different forms, as can wisdom or the cloud of witnesses. Generally, they appear to me in ways that I relate. Was that the physical appearance that they had when they were on Earth? I have no idea, because I've not seen them in that guise mostly. So you just got to, if you're sensing that it's not a bad experience, then again, okay, God, what were you trying to show me? Why did you appear like that? What significance was there in that? Because that's the point of going back to God and finding out, and engaging with that to see, well, what was its purpose? Some of these things are, quite difficult to fathom, but then look at some of the stories in the Bible. They're quite difficult to fathom as well. Angels appeared in all sorts of ways: pillars of cloud, pillars of fire, speaking out of a fiery bush. There's certainly some interesting encounters that people had in the spiritual dimension. So, build a relationship with God, I think, is the key in all this. Then you can ask him. It's as easy as that. Once you can talk to him, it's really easy. Probably sometimes these things happen because a person hasn't got the simplicity of that relationship, and God's got to get their attention. So he wants us to be able to communicate with him consistently all the time, because he's with us and in us, and we're in him. And he wants that relationship to be real and engageable. Sometimes a lot of experiences are challenges, and if they get our attention, then I want to know why. That's the point for me. Any experience, encounter, why? What's behind it? What were you trying to show me? What were you unveiling? What were you revealing? That requires relationship with God for those things to be outworked. And the deeper our relationships with him are, the easier it is to sense when things aren't actually coming from him, or could be something which was a deception masquerading as light. because you know the genuine sense of the frequency of heaven and the frequency of beings that are living in those realms of heaven. And when you engage them, there is a resonance with it. When you're engaging something that isn't from those realms, even though it might look like it is, then you should be able to sense and discern what source it's from. When you train a currency treasury agent whose role is to track counterfeit, they never give them counterfeit things. They only give them the real and the genuine. So then they're so familiar with the real and the genuine that anything counterfeit is just sensed immediately. And I think we need to get very familiar with the presence of God and the angelic realm and the frequency and the fragrance and the light that they carry, that then when we come across anything that we're unsure of, we should be able to sensitively discern what source that is from. But it takes time, and I think, we're still living in an age which is instant, instant everything, microwave this and instant coffee and instant this and instant the other. And it's easy to get caught up in the instant sort of generation which we live in and not spend the time it takes to develop relational perspectives and be able to know and to feel and to sense, because we spend a lot of time engaging with it without too much of an agenda. I think too many times people have an agenda that drives what they're looking for and makes it harder for God to engage them.
Thank you. Yeah, if anyone don't have, that's another one I needed to ask. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. Mike, have you ever, for now, I'm talking about now, because the question I want to ask is about the Old Testament. Have you ever encountered, or what is the revelation behind, the seventh plague in the when Moses went to meet Pharaoh? So, to my own explanation, I just go that it's as a result of disobedience, or what kind of idolatry that the Egyptians were doing as a result of Pharaoh's disobedience, releasing the people. Is there any revelation there for now, or have you ever encountered the seventh plague?
Is
it seven?
God can speak through the Old Testament. I would rather, again, learn to listen to God's voice rather than try and unravel some cryptic, symbolic thing. But hey, people do, and God does. There's multiple levels of revelation that comes from a particular scripture or story or passage. There's usually the obvious on the surface, and then there's something deeper, and then there may well be something of metaphorical analogy that is, a representation of something that gives us insight today. All of that is possible, but we don't live in the old covenant anymore. So, we're living in the new covenant. I'm more and more shying away from the old covenant pictures to the new covenant revelation and reality. They were types and shadows. Well, if there was a type and a shadow of something, well, now we've actually got the reality of it. So why go back to types and shadows? That's how I see it now. So I don't spend much time engaging in anything of the old covenant scriptures, particularly simply because I believe we're living in a new covenant reality where those scriptures are now fulfilled. All the promises of God are yes in Christ. Therefore, all the covenants of God are realized in Christ. Everything is realized in Christ. Therefore, if we engaged with Jesus as the way, the truth, and the life, then we don't need to get confused with whether a story is allegorical or whether it's symbolic or whether it was real or not. And a lot of what was written from the perspectives of those who wrote it, and they are not all going to write. It wasn't dictated, put it that way. You know, so a lot of things that are attributed to God in the Old Covenant were not God. They just attributed it to God because they were God's people, and therefore they felt that they were the hand of God in the earth. Therefore, when they did something, God was doing it. That was their whole mindset and belief. So often you'll find that, okay, was it God's intention for the plagues to come on Egypt? No, because God doesn't bring any plagues on anybody. But if people fail to respond to what God is saying, then it opens them up for the enemy to do things to them. That's the consequence of rebellion.
Yes.
You know, it isn't God doing it, but effectively it opens the situation up for the negative thing to come about. And whatever God does do or allow, it's always going to be for restorative purposes, not punitive or retributive ones. Because did he want Pharaoh, or did he want all the firstborn to die?
Mm-hmm.
No. And the angel of death that came over was not a good angel.
No.
You know, so in a sense, you know, we got to sort of look at seeing things through the lens of Jesus. Jesus was the express image of the Father. He only did what he saw the Father doing, so he was a full representation of the Father's nature and character. Therefore, what you look at in the Old Testament and the Old Covenant needs to be seen through that lens.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we think God is two-faced. He's great in the New Testament. In the Old Testament, he's this harsh tyrant.
Yeah.
You know? And actually, he's not. He's the same loving Father. But sometimes the loving Father will say, okay, well, if you want to do this, I'm not going to stop you. But the consequences of you walking down that path are yours. And I think the example would be, give us a king. You know, well, they already had a king. He was God. But they wanted a king like other nations. So God allowed it. And then they had to go through the whole process of what he warned them about as a result of it, and all the wars and all the stuff they entered into and everything else. So God said, okay, you can have your wish, but the consequences are always yours. The same would be, oh, well, we're following other gods. So we're going to worship the gods of the Philistines. So God says, okay, if you want to do that, you can. But now ask the God of the Philistines to look after you. And of course, he never will it? Because they're not real gods in a sense. You know? So then what happens? They go after foreign gods, and then, oh no, the Philistines are upon us. So then oh God, help. So did God do that, or did he allow them to have the consequences of their choices? But it was always restorative, because as soon as they turned to him, which was his whole intention for when those things happened to them, was that they would then turn to him and say, help. And he sent them a judge, and that judge led them out from under the Philistines or the Midianites, or depending on which judge. And then they're back in relationship with the Father. The same thing applies with the prodigal son. The father didn't say, no, you're not having your inheritance. I'd rather you stayed here with me and worked with me, and we have this. He said, okay. And then he let him go. But when he came back, he welcomed him with open arms, because he was still his son. He never was not a son, even though he was living estranged from his father, doing things that the father probably wouldn't want him to do. But the father's love was still there, and the embrace was still there, and the restoration of sonship came. because of that loving relationship. So God will allow us to have the consequences of things we do. And some of that is not, and it's not that he wants that, but he gives us the choice. You know, if we make choices that take us down the wrong path, he will try and redeem those choices and enable us to get back to the path. That's his desire. He wants to bring good out of everything, even the worst things we do, and redeem them. You know, that's his love for us. But he will remove his hand and say, okay, if you choose to walk over there where I'm not walking, then you're on your own. No, we're not really on our own, but from the perspective of his provision, protection, direction, if we choose to follow our own path, like Adam did, then you're going to suffer the consequences of walking that path. And mankind is still in the consequences of walking the do-it-yourself path of our own knowledge. And God wants to bring a restoration of us back to relationship with him, which would unveil the way, the truth, and the life, the real reality and knowledge, rather than our own. But he's not going to force it on anybody in that way. You know, he's wanting choice. He'll engineer opportunities for choice, which is why some of those things that happen to us are designed by God, although God doesn't do it, to use it to get us to see, hey, it's better over here with God than what I was doing over there on my own. And eventually the prodigal son came to his senses. He realized it would be better to be in the father's house, even as a servant, than be in a pig pen, you know, living off pig's will. You know, he came to his senses. Now, we want everyone to come to their senses and realize that a relationship with God has already been provided. They just need to enter into the experience of that relationship. And God will use the bad things that happen in people's lives to help them to come to that realization that they need an external relationship rather than doing it on their own, you know. So most of the time you'll find when you see that the Israelites said, oh, God told us to do this and do that and do the other, you see God took his hand away and allowed them, you know, and that's a big difference than God doing it. You know. So I would encourage people to focus on engaging a relationship with the way, truth, and the life.
Yeah.
And don't bother with the types and shadows when you've got the real.
Yes.
You know, now that makes total sense to me now. It wouldn't have made sense to me 10 years ago, but it makes total sense to me now. You know,
it's not fun to engage the plague, though. It's not going to be fun to engage plague. Oh,
well, you know, yeah, there are plagues. I mean, you could say, look at the 7 churches in Revelation and look at the things that happened to them as examples. You know, and, you know, these things can be examples. I mean, it talks about in Corinthians that, you know, what the children of Israel went through are examples for us.
Yeah.
Basically, not to do the same. You know, that's the example. Learn from our mistakes. Don't make the same ones. That's the example. But then when you're then pursuing intimacy with the Father through Jesus, it's much easier to go with that flow than trying to work out what should we be doing or not be doing and trying to do it all as a logical, analytical process. It needs to be a spiritual, communicative directive that we follow his heart, not series of rules and regulations and instructions in that way. So
thank you, Mike.
okay. Okay, Anushka, you got your hand there.
I had a similar question because as Mary was talking, there was a question along the same lines which occurred to me while she was speaking. which was the 7 bowl judgments
Hmm.
after Jesus' death and resurrection. So I was wondering about that while she was talking.
Yeah, I mean, the 7 bowl judgments of Revelation were the outworking of the end of the old covenant and the beginning of the new. So they were outworking that, but they obviously have different symbolic connections. So the 7 seals, the 7 trumpets, the 7 bowls, the 7 things. 7 obviously is the number of God, the perfection number. Man is usually the number of 6, therefore we're usually less than. And to enter into, we need to embrace those things. So, there's the 7 gateways of our spirit, the 7 seals that are within, unlocking things. There's lots of different levels to all of these things. And on the surface level, the 7 seals, the 7 bowls, the 7 trumpets were a description of the end of the old covenant in AD 70 and the end of the old and the beginning of the new, the final end where it passed away, and Jesus prophesied that was going to happen in that generation, and it did. And that was Jesus talked to his disciples, answering their questions about, well, when will these things be? In other words, when will the temple be destroyed? When will be the end of the age? And when will be the sign of your presence? And they are all related to the same thing. We see judgment as a negative thing when God sees judgment as a positive thing. It's a verdict that says, the end of this, now the beginning of this. And so John saw that in the vision when he went into heaven. Jesus described it to the disciples that was described by Matthew in Matthew 23 to 26 and by Luke in Luke 21. And they described the whole scene, which happened in that generation and isn't going to happen again. So there were the outpouring. Now, if you don't understand Old Testament symbolism, it's very difficult to understand Revelation, because the Bible explains itself when you allow it to, by not trying to put it onto the future and understand it through our current mindsets. They understood what it meant, and they understood what a seal was, or a trumpet was, or a bowl was. They understood it because they're all related to things which are old covenant symbols. So if we see it in that purpose, even the destruction of Jerusalem was a judgment for good, because it was the birth pangs of the new, as described in Matthew 24. This was the end of the old and the beginning of the new. So the birth is often a traumatic process for some ladies, and therefore sometimes there is a cataclysmic end of an old system for the birthing of a new. And you see that in the old covenant language of God coming on the clouds, rolling the heavens up as a scroll, the sun stopping still, the moon not giving its light. All of those symbols are the symbol of the end of a governmental order. And you could find that written about Babylon, Egypt, Assyria, and eventually Israel. So it was warned in Matthew 24 that there would be these signs in the heavens. And those were just symbolic of the end of the government of the old covenant and the beginning of the new covenantal full outworking. And the kingdom, Jesus said, will be removed from Israel and given to the people who would bear fruit. And that's where we are now. So the symbols were practically outworked, but it was a good thing, and all those who didn't heed Jesus's warning to flee to the mountains when they saw the armies coming, or the abomination of desolation coming into Jerusalem, died, most of them, and they got thrown into the valley of Hinnom, Gehenna in a literal fiery rubbish dump, and hundreds of thousands of them were crucified because they failed to heed Jesus's warning of coming out of the old system and its covenantal protection, which was now removed, and entering into the new covenant where our protection is within our relationship with God. And not one believer died in Jerusalem. They all escaped because they didn't believe that this was going to be 2,000 or 3,000 years later. They knew it was going to be in their generation, and they were looking for it. And when they saw it, they ran. So all of those things are basically describing the end of the old and the beginning of the new. And there are, you know, meanings to the seals and the trumpets and things when you understand Old Covenant perspectives. And it was written in apocalyptical language, you know, and that is very, very figurative. And there was a lot of Old Testament apocalyptic language, you know, and if you read Ezekiel and you read some of the books, it's just like, whoa, this is, you know, the guy was writing on some sort of acid trip, you know, or something, where he was seeing all these weird things that he was trying to describe, you know. But in reality, you know, he did his best to describe things that now, you know, we have the experience of. So, you know, where he was describing the cherubim and the four living creatures, the four faces and the wings, and, you know, now we carry, of the order of Melchizedek, we carry the cherubic nature, because we're supposed to be lion, ox, eagle, man, representing God's government in heaven and outworking on earth, you know. But if you read that in Ezekiel, you can be like, whoa, this is like a science fiction fantasy book. But actually, you know, what it meant was what we're living in today. You know, now we're in the fulfillment of those promises. We're not needing to look back to the old because it's ended, and we're living in the new. But actually, most religion goes back to the old and defaults back to a mediatorial system, which we're no longer under. And God wants to bring us into the freedom of, you know, what we're now in, not go back to those old types and shadows, which will bring us back under the bondage of mediation and a priesthood, which is one person in one place in one temple, rather than everybody in every place in the world carrying the presence of God as the house of God and outworking it. So things have changed a lot. But, you know, God can speak through you through sevens. You know, a lot of sevens. There's a lot of sevens in terms of the 7 redemptive gifts, and, you know, a lot of the 7 colors and the 7 notes of the musical scale. There's a lot of sevens which relate to frequency and different things. But, you know, I'd much rather get the simple yes, no, do this, hey, I want to show you this, than have to try and fathom out all of that stuff. You know, and how many, you know, thousands of books have been written on commentaries of Revelation that all attribute those symbols to totally different things, you know, because of the framework in which they're written from. So, you know, for me, it's like the old covenant's ended, all prophecy has ended. Now we're living in the time of the restoration of all things. So let's get on with seeing all things restored, not going back to repeating the old mistakes of the old covenant system, which is, hey, Moses, you go and you tell us what God's saying, rather than, no, everyone goes and everyone hears what God's saying. Therefore, we're all responsible. We can't put it on one person and blame them. My sheep can hear my voice. That's what Jesus said. He didn't say my sheep will read a book, and he actually didn't say my sheep will see either. He said my sheep will hear my voice. And developing the ability to hear the voice of God, for me, is the key foundation to everything in relationship. You know. So, yeah.
I found that much easier, Mike, as opposed to, because even with the ascension groups that I'm with, as I started growing in the Lord, I mean, in the heavenly realms, and just spending time with Him, what it says in the book of Revelation is, I couldn't even connect the God that I'm talking to with the judgments and the death and, you know, everything else. It seemed like I was relating to someone completely different when I would just step into His heart. It was not about death and destruction. And I couldn't understand because the circles that I was in I'm still in, and even in the previous church that I was in, believe that, the judgments and all these things are going to happen. And you know how it is. It's like it is going to happen, and God is going to make these people suffer, and which is so different from what I'm personally experiencing and have experienced. So I just
people's eschatology can tie them to an old covenant perspective of God and that way of judgment and everything else, and limit what we're doing because of that view. And I think eschatology is a huge issue for a lot of people who are looking for the fulfillment of revelation in that judgment thing, and God is going to destroy the whore of Babylon. He's going to do this, and actually it's so contradictory to the relationship that we have in love, in the way in which people are still looking for those things rather than looking to see the outworking, because it's always put off to the future. And if you put all this stuff off to the future, you don't live in the benefit of the present. Whether people, those people who believe in a rapture, well, we're going to be raptured one day in the future and we're going to be rescued, are not living for the kingdom to fill the earth, to overcome, to subdue and rule, because there's no sense in doing that if it's going to fail. Those people who believe that the earth is going to be purified with fire, rather than seeing the symbolic nature that it's already been purified with fire, it isn't a new heavens and a new earth that we're going to have. We are the new heavens and the new earth. We are the temple of the presence of God, the new wineskin. You see, heavens and earth was a description of the old covenant, particularly symbolic of the temple. So when the heavens and the earth passed away, it was just the end of the old temple covenant system. It wasn't that earth is going to be purged with fire. If so, well, what's the point of looking after the planet? It's all going to get burnt up anyway. You see, we're given stewardship of this, not because it's going to be burnt up, because we're supposed to bring heaven to the earth and see the garden of heaven fill the earth so that it will come back into the paradise that it was intended to be. Totally different mindset if you think it's going to get destroyed one day. All of those negativities failed to realize that they were language which was describing the old of the end of the old. It wasn't to do with the end of the world, because the end of the world, the word age, enios, is not world, cosmos, or earth. It's age. It's an end of a period of time which ended. So that Jesus said that the law would not pass away until that new heavens and the new earth. So if we're still looking for a new heavens and a new earth, then we're still under the law, according to Jesus. You can look it up. Look, he talked about it, but he wasn't really talking about that. What he was basically saying is, when this old temple system comes, a new temple system, the new heavens and the new earth, the new Jerusalem, will actually be in place. And we are that wineskin. We are a temple of the Holy Spirit. We are a house of God. That's what it means. But if you don't understand the significance of the language, you continue to look for something that's already happened and get stuck in the fear of waiting for it to happen, rather than the joy of living in the fullness of the new covenant that we're in. And God, is a God who is a God of love, and love is his very essence and nature. And love does not destroy or punish. Love disciplines and corrects and challenges and changes, but it doesn't destroy or punish. And that is the wrong view of God that system of eschatology has developed. And he's not like that. And as you say, the more you spend time with him face to face, the more you realize he's not like that. And then that brings the change and the challenge to the old beliefs that we have of that sort of judgmental God who's going to come and wipe everything out one day. So anyway, okay, I need to leave it there.